The baby wouldn't stop crying. 4 hours, 17 minutes, through turbulence over the Atlantic, through 3 different flight attendants offering bottles, pacifiers, gentle words that meant nothing, through a first-class cabin full of people who had paid a great deal of money for silence and were getting none of it. That baby screamed, and not one single person moved to help. Flight 847, London to New York, 40,000 feet above an ocean that didn't care about anyone's problems. The cabin lights had been dimmed for the night crossing. Most passengers had their eyes closed, pretending to sleep, pretending they couldn't hear the sound that had been drilling into their skulls since somewhere over Ireland. But they could hear it. Everyone could hear it. The crying carried a particular quality, not the angry wail of a hungry infant, not the fussy complaint of a tired one. This was something else, something that reached into the chest and twisted. The sound of a child who had forgotten what comfort felt like, who had been crying so long he no longer remembered why he started. The man holding him sat in seat 1A, the very front of the cabin, as though the seat had been built for him alone. He had white hair, not the white of old age, something else, the white of snow on a mountain peak, the white of bone. It fell past his shoulders loose and straight, catching the overhead light in a way that made it look almost liquid. His face could have been carved from stone, strong jaw, high cheekbones, eyes so dark they looked black even in direct light. He stared down at the infant in his arms with an expression that was difficult to read. Not quite desperation, not quite sorrow. Something older than both. The baby was impossibly small, wrapped in a midnight blue blanket that made his skin look even paler. His tiny fists were clenched. His face was flushed red. His cries had thinned to a sound that was barely human anymore, just air and exhaustion. 3 rows back in seat 4, a Maren Hollis sat with her eyes closed and her hands pressed flat against her thighs. 28 years old, pediatric nurse. Red hair pulled back in a braid that had started the flight neat and was now coming undone. She wore jeans and a gray sweater. No makeup. Dark circles under her eyes that said she hadn't been sleeping well for a long time. She had booked this flight for a grief counseling workshop in Manhattan, one of those things people do when they're drowning and don't know what else to try, when every morning feels like waking up in a house that's on fire and no one else can see the flames. 6 months ago she had a daughter, Rosalie. 4 months old, dark curls, green eyes, a laugh that sounded like water over stones. She had died in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in March. No warning, no reason the doctors could find, just gone. Sudden infant death syndrome. 3 words that explained nothing and changed everything. Maren had stopped telling people about Rosalie. It was easier that way. People never knew what to say. They'd search for words while she stood there holding herself together with both hands, so she'd learned to smile, to say she was fine, to let the subject drop like a stone into deep water. But she was not fine. The crying reached her anyway, not as noise, as something else, as muscle memory, as the particular pain of breasts that still produced milk for a child who was no longer there. She felt the warmth spread across her chest, felt her body respond to a sound it had been trained to answer. Her eyes opened. That is not a hungry baby, she thought. The certainty came from somewhere deep, from the part of her that had spent 4 months learning every variation of her daughter's cry. That is a baby who lost his mother. She pressed her palm against her sternum and sat very still. 6 months. 6 months, and her body still didn't understand that Rosalie was gone. She looked toward the front of the cabin. The man with white hair was staring down at his son. His shoulders were rigid, his jaw was tight, and for just a moment, just a flicker, that hand trembled. Maren saw it, and something inside her that had been sealed shut for 6 months cracked open like a window finally being pushed free. She stood up. The man in the seat next to her grabbed her wrist. He was in his 50s. Expensive suit. Wedding ring. "Don't," he said, low, urgent, the way people speak when they're genuinely afraid. Maren looked at him. "I've seen that man before, in certain places. He is not..." He stopped, swallowed hard. Just don't. Marin looked at the baby, at the tiny chest heaving with exhaustion, at the tears on the flushed cheeks. "Someone has to," she said. She walked down the aisle. Every head turned. The flight attendant near the galley took one step forward, then stopped, frozen by instinct. The man heard her coming. Those black eyes lifted from his son's face and fixed on her with a stillness so absolute it felt like being pinned to the air. Marin didn't slow down. She stopped beside seat 1A, looked at the baby. "I know what he needs," she said quietly, "and I think I'm the only one on this plane who can give it to him." The cabin went silent, the absolute silence of people who have stopped breathing. The man stared at her. Something moved behind those ancient eyes. Not quite surprise, something older. "You are not afraid of me," he said. "Not a question." "I've already lost the thing I was most afraid of losing," Marin answered. "There's nothing left to be afraid of." The man studied her face. After a moment that stretched long enough to feel like drowning, he spoke again. "What is your name?" "Marin Hollis." "I am Lucian Ashford. This is my son, Rhys." "Hello, Rhys," Marin said softly. "I lost my daughter 6 months ago. Her name was Rosalie, and I think maybe I can help you." The baby's cries had quieted to hiccuping sobs, as though he could hear something in her voice. Lucian stood, held out the baby. "The restroom. It's the only place with privacy." Marin took Rhys into her arms. The moment she did, everything changed. The crying stopped, instantly, like a switch being flipped, like a flame finding oxygen after suffocating in the dark. Rhys settled against her chest. His tiny hand found the fabric of her sweater, held on. Marin felt it. The warmth, the letdown, her body responding the way it had been trained to respond. "Come," Lucian said quietly. The restroom was barely large enough for one person. Lucian stood with his back against the door, blocking it, guarding it. Marin sat on the closed toilet lid, held Rhys. "You've done this before," Lucian said. "I was a mother," Marin said, "before I was anything else." Rhys nursed the way starving things eat, desperate, grateful. His eyes drifted closed. The quiet that followed was profound. "How long has he been like this?" she asked. "Since his mother died, 8 weeks ago." 8 weeks. A newborn without peace. "I'm sorry," Marin said. She meant it the way only people who have truly lost someone can mean it. "As am I," Lucian replied. "For your daughter." When it was done, Marin stood carefully. Rhys didn't wake. Lucian reached into his jacket, produced a card, matte black, no logo, just an address written in silver ink, and on the back, a single word: Romania. "I never forget a debt, Miss Hollis," he said. "If you would permit me, I would like to thank you properly." Marin took the card. Every sensible instinct she possessed said to pocket it and never think about it again. She put the card in her pocket. "I'll think about it," she said. They returned to the cabin. Rhys slept on his father's chest, and Marin sat back down and looked out the window at the darkness over the Atlantic and felt for the first time in 6 months like maybe she had done something that mattered. The plane landed in New York at dawn. Marin collected her bag, took a taxi to the hotel where the grief workshop was being held, sat through the first morning session listening to a woman with kind eyes talk about stages of grief as though loss followed a schedule. By lunch, she knew she wasn't staying. The workshop couldn't give her what she needed, couldn't answer the question that had been sitting in her chest since that airplane restroom. She pulled out the black card, looked at the address written in silver ink. Romania. She bought a ticket that afternoon, didn't tell anyone where she was going, didn't have anyone to tell. 3 days after Flight 847, she stood at iron gates in the Carpathian Mountains. The castle rose from the mountainside like something out of a fever dream. Gray stone, sharp towers, windows that caught the late afternoon light and threw it back like warnings. A woman stood at the gates, around 60 in appearance, silver hair pinned in a severe bun, dark dress. Miss Hollis, the woman said. Her accent was faint, Eastern European. I am Evelyn. Master Ashford is expecting you. The gates opened without anyone touching them. Inside the castle was not what Maren had imagined. She'd expected cold stone and darkness. What she found was firelight, the smell of something baking, heavy tapestries in deep reds and greens, rooms that felt like they had been lived in carefully for centuries. In the center of the largest sitting room, in a chair that was almost but not quite a throne, sat Lucian Ashford, with Rhys asleep on his chest. He stood when she entered, carefully, so as not to wake his son. "You came," he said. "You seem surprised." "I am. No one comes here willingly." Maren looked around the room, at the portraits on the walls, at the weight of a life lived so long it had become architecture. "What is this place?" she asked. "Home," Lucian said simply. For just a moment the words sounded like the loneliest thing she had ever heard. Dinner was candlelit. The food was simple but perfect. Wine that tasted older than anything Maren had ever put in her mouth. Lucian sat across from her. Rhys slept in a bassinet beside the table. "You should tell me what your son is," Maren said eventually. "What you are. Because I'm a nurse. And I know that what happened on that plane was not ordinary." Lucian set down his glass. "No, it was not." And then he told her. Not everything, but enough. Vampire. The word hung in the air between them like smoke. 500 years old. Isolde, his wife, dead 8 weeks ago. Childbirth, the blood-milk bond, ancient magic. When a mortal woman nursed an infant of the immortal bloodline, it created a connection, supernatural, unbreakable. "How long does it last?" Maren asked. "That depends. Sometimes months, sometimes years, sometimes forever." The fire crackled. Rhys stirred. Lucien's hand moved to the bassinet. Gentle. "Why are you telling me this?" Maren asked. "Because you deserve to know what you've stepped into, and because I am tired of lies." Maren looked at him, at the father holding together by threads. "Okay," she said. "Then here's my truth. I came here because my daughter died, and for 6 months I've been trying to figure out how to live in a world where she doesn't exist. And I don't have an answer yet. But holding your son on that plane was the first time I felt like maybe I could find one." Lucien was quiet for a long time. "Then stay," he said finally. "As long as you need." Maren looked at the baby sleeping in the bassinet. "I'll stay," she said. "For a while." On the third morning Evelyn brought her to a small room, one window facing east, a wooden table, and on that table a box, old dark wood, leather bindings worn soft by centuries of handling. "The master's late wife," Evelyn said quietly. "She wrote letters during her pregnancy. He has tried to read them 4 times. He cannot." Maren looked at the box. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you are the first person he has allowed past that door in 200 years. I thought you should know what it costs him." Maren opened the box. Inside were dozens of letters. She picked up one. Just one. Read. "My dearest Lucienne, if you are reading this, I am gone. Find someone who can give him what I cannot, someone patient, someone brave, someone who chooses him not because they have to, but because they want to. And when you find her, tell her thank you for loving what I had to leave behind." Maren's hands shook. She folded the letter carefully, put it back, closed the box. "These are his to read, not mine." Evelyn nodded. That night Maren stood in the nursery. Rhys was asleep in his crib. Lucien stood in the doorway. "Tell me about Rosalie," he said. No one had asked her that in months. "She loved rain," Maren said finally. "She was 4 months old and she loved rain. She'd go completely still when she heard it." Lucien was quiet. "Isolde loved snow. She said it made the world gentle." They stood in the nursery, Rhys sleeping between them, centuries of loss in the air around them. Neither spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The castle had a rhythm. Maren learned it in the days that followed. Morning light through east-facing windows at exactly 6:43. The sound of Evelyn's footsteps on stone floors. The smell of bread baking in a kitchen 3 centuries old. And beneath it all the sound of Rhys breathing. She had moved into the room next to the nursery without anyone suggesting it. Evelyn had nodded once, said nothing, left fresh linens on the bed. The room was simple. Stone walls, a window that looked out over mountains, a bed older than her country, and a door that connected directly to where Rhys slept. She kept that door open. At night she would hear him stir, would be on her feet before the first cry could form, would lift him and settle into the chair by the window and let her body do what it remembered. The bond was growing stronger. She could feel it. When Rhys was hungry, she knew before he cried. When he was uncomfortable, she felt it like a pull in her chest. It should have frightened her. It didn't. Lucienne watched from doorways. Never intrusive, just there. Present in the way fathers are when they're learning to trust someone else with the most precious thing they have. One morning she found him in the library, floor-to-ceiling books. He sat in a chair by the window with Rhys on his lap, reading aloud, philosophy, in a language Maren didn't recognize. "He can't understand that," she said from the doorway. Lucienne looked up. "No, but he can hear my voice, and that matters more than the words." "What language is it?" "Latin. I learned it when it was still spoken in the streets." He paused. "I forget sometimes how much the world has changed, how much I have not." Maren crossed the room, sat in the chair across from him. Rhys made a small sound, reached for her. Lucienne handed him over without hesitation. "Tell me about being immortal," Maren said. Lucienne was quiet for a moment. "Imagine carrying everything, every face you've ever loved, every war you've fought, every mistake, and knowing you will carry them forever. There is no forgetting, just the weight of it all adding up year after year. That sounds lonely." "It is, profoundly so." He looked at Rhys. "Until it isn't." Understanding formed between them. They were both people who had learned what it meant to lose everything and find a way to keep breathing anyway. "Isolde's letters," Maren said carefully. "Have you tried to read them again?" Lucienne's jaw tightened. "No." "Why not?" "Because opening that box means accepting she is gone, and I am not certain I am ready to accept that yet." Maren shifted Rhys in her arms. The baby had fallen asleep. "I couldn't go into Rosalie's nursery for 4 months," she said quietly. "I'd stand in the hallway, put my hand on the door, and I couldn't turn the handle, because as long as I didn't go in, I could pretend she was still just sleeping." "When did you finally go in?" "The day before I left for New York. I made myself do it, packed up her clothes, stood in that empty room and said goodbye." She paused. "It didn't make it hurt less, but it made it real. And real is something you can learn to live with." Lucienne looked at her for a long time. "You are wiser than your years suggest, Maren Hollis. I'm just tired of running from things that are faster than I am." That night she couldn't sleep. Maren lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to Rhys breathing in the next room. She got up, walked through the connecting door. Rhys was asleep. Lucienne sat in the chair beside the crib. One large hand rested on his son's back. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Sleep is optional when you're immortal. But I still come here, still watch him, still make sure he's breathing." Maren understood. She'd done the same thing with Rosalie. She sat on the floor, leaned her back against his chair. They stayed like that, close but still distant, while Rhys slept and the night deepened around them. "I called you family," Lucienne said softly. "Yesterday, when I introduced you to the council representative, I said you were family. I noticed. Did it bother you?" "No." Maren was quiet. "People like us, people who've lost what we've lost, We recognize each other. That's a kind of family, too. His hand found hers in the dark. Large, cool to the touch, careful. Maren didn't pull away. They sat in the nursery until dawn began to creep through the window. Neither spoke again. They didn't need to. When Lucien finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Thank you for staying." "I know," Maren said. "You're welcome." The phone call came on the 7th day. Maren was in the garden with Rhys. Stone paths wound through tall grass. Old roses climbed walls that had been standing since before her country existed. Rhys was awake, alert, looking at everything with those dark eyes. "You're going to be trouble," she told him. "I can already tell." He made a sound. Not quite a coo. Maren laughed. The first real laugh she'd made in longer than she could remember. She didn't see Evelyn approach until the woman was standing beside her, silent as always. But her face was tight, concerned. "What's wrong?" "The master needs you. Inside. Now." Maren didn't ask questions, just followed. Lucien stood in his study, a room of dark wood and maps on walls. He held a phone to his ear. His face was carved from ice. "Say that again," he said. His voice was deadly quiet. A pause. "If you touch her, I will burn your house to the ground and salt the earth where it stood." Another pause. "I don't make idle threats, Cassian. You know this." He ended the call, threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the stone wall. "Lucien." Maren's voice was steady. He turned to her. The expression on his face was nothing she'd seen before, something ancient and furious and barely contained. "Cassian Vale," he said. "An old enemy. He knows you're here. He knows about the bond. And he's coming." "Why?" "Because he lost his son in a war 100 years ago. A war I helped wage. And he has been looking for a way to hurt me ever since. He will use you to get to me. You and Rhys." Maren held Rhys closer. "Then we leave. Now. There is nowhere he cannot find us." As if on cue, the first explosion hit. The floor shuddered. Somewhere in the distance, glass shattered. An alarm began to sound. Evelyn appeared in the doorway. She was holding a sword, a real sword, long and sharp and clearly well used. "They're inside the outer walls," Evelyn said. Her voice was calm. "At least 6. "The safe room," Lucien said. He crossed to Maren in 2 strides, took her face in his hands. "Listen to me. Evelyn will take you and Rhys to the safe room. It's deep underground, protected. You'll be safe. What about you? I will stop them." "Lucien." "No." His voice was absolute. "I have lived 500 years. I have fought wars you cannot imagine. I will not lose you. I will not lose him. Do you understand me?" She nodded. He pressed his lips to her forehead, quick, fierce. Then he was gone. Evelyn grabbed Maren's arm. "Move, now!" They ran. Through corridors Maren had never seen, behind a tapestry that concealed a narrow door, down stairs that spiraled into darkness. The sounds of fighting echoed above them. The safe room was deep underground, stone walls so thick they seemed to absorb sound. A single door, heavy, iron, with markings carved into it that looked ancient. Evelyn pushed them inside. "Do not open this door, for anyone, unless you hear my voice or the master's. Understand?" "Yes." The door sealed. Maren stood in the center of the room. It was small, lit by a single lantern that burned without fuel. Ancient magic. Rhys was crying, not screaming, just crying. The confused, frightened sound of a baby who didn't understand why everything had suddenly gone loud and wrong. "I know," Maren whispered. "I've got you." She sat on the floor, let him nurse, felt his fear recede. She counted the minutes. Old hospital habit. She made it to 11. Then the ward broke. She felt it before she understood it. A drop in pressure. The markings on the door flickered, dimmed, went dark, and the door opened from the outside in a way it was not supposed to be able to open. 3 figures stepped through, long dark coats, eyes that caught no light, and behind them, moving with unhurried patience, a man who appeared around 60 but carried himself like something far older. Cassian Vale, silver hair at his temples, cold eyes the color of winter ice, a face worn down by grief until all that remained was the sharp edge of it. "Miss Hollis," he said, as though they were acquaintances meeting for tea. "I have been looking forward to this." Marin pulled Reese closer, stood her ground. "Don't come any closer to this baby." Cassian tilted his head. Something flickered in his expression. Respect, perhaps. "No trembling," he said softly. "No screaming. You know who I am, what I want. I know you want Lucienne. Reese is leverage, which means you need us alive." 3 seconds of absolute quiet. Then Cassian smiled. "You are going to be a great deal of trouble." He stepped closer. Marin saw it then. Not cruelty in his eyes, grief worn down to its sharpest edge. The kind that has been carried so long it no longer hurts the person holding it, it just hurts everything around them. He really did lose a son, she thought. And this is what happened to him afterward. She said nothing, just held Reese tighter and let Cassian believe he had won. For now it was safer that way. The castle Cassian brought them to was everything Lucien's was not. Cold, intentionally so. Stone corridors stripped of warmth, of color, of any evidence that life had ever been welcome. They gave Marin a room, locked the door, left a single candle. She sat on the floor with her back against the bed. Reese was awake, quiet against her chest. "Your father is coming," she whispered. "He won't leave us here." She did what she had learned to do in the worst months of her life. She breathed. She stayed inside this moment. And then very softly, Reese reached up. His small hand found her face in the dim light. His fingers touched her cheek, and Marin felt it. Not heard. Felt, deep in the center of her chest, like a thought that wasn't hers. Mom. She went completely still. Mom. Here. Safe. The telepathic bond. Still forming. But there. Real. A tiny boy reaching through his ancient inheritance and finding her, calling her mother. The tears came then, not the kind that want to be seen, the deep kind, structural. She pressed her face into his dark hair and held him and let herself feel all of it. The grief of Rosalie, the fear of this locked room, the impossible fact that she would walk into all of it again without hesitation, because this is what mothers do. We stay, even when staying is the most frightening thing imaginable. And in that moment alone in a locked room with a baby who had just called her mother, for the first time she realized the terrible truth. She was not going to leave him. Not Reese. Not this world. And not the man who had handed her his son on an airplane and changed the entire direction of her life. She was already in too deep to save herself. And for the first time she was not sure she wanted to be saved. The hours passed slowly. Marin heard footsteps in the corridor, voices in languages she didn't understand. She mapped the fortress in her mind. Just before dawn she heard the sound of gates opening below her window. She crossed to the narrow opening, looked down. And there he was, Lucien Ashford, walking through the courtyard with his hands open and his head unbowed. Alone. Just a man offering himself like someone laying down something he's carried for 5 centuries and is finally tired of holding. Marin pressed her hand against the cold stone. The same gesture she'd made against the hospital window the morning they told her about Rosalie. Not again, she thought. Not this time. She looked down at Reese. Reese looked back at her with those dark, ancient eyes, and she felt it, soft as breath. Go. Just that one word through the bond. Marin didn't wait to be let out. The blood milk bond had been working in her, quietly, changing things. She'd noticed the way darkness wasn't quite as dark anymore, the way she could hear through walls, the way her body felt different, stronger. She stopped ignoring it. She wrapped Reese against her chest, walked to the door, and pushed. The lock held for exactly 1 second. Then something in her borrowed ancient, entirely not her own, pushed back. The door opened. She moved through Cassian's fortress like someone who had decided fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. Down the stairs, through the corridor, past 2 guards who turned and did not move in time, and stepped into the courtyard just as Cassian raised his hand. "Stop." Her voice cut across the gray dawn like something thrown. Both men turned. Lucien went completely still. "Marin," her name in his mouth, barely above a whisper. "Don't," she said. To him, to Cassian, to anyone who thought they were going to make decisions about her life without her. "Don't do this." She crossed the courtyard, stopped between them, between the old world and the new one, between 500 years of power and one woman in a borrowed robe holding a baby against her heart. And for the first time since this all began, Marin Hollis decided exactly what came next. The courtyard was silent. Gray stone, gray sky, the kind of dawn that comes without color, just the slow bleeding of darkness into something that isn't quite light. Lucien stood 15 feet from Cassian Vale. His hands were open at his sides. His white hair moved slightly in the wind. He wore no armor, carried no weapon. Cassian watched him with the patience of something that had outlived hurry. His silver hair caught what little light there was. His eyes were the color of ice that has never seen sun. Between them, Marin stood with Reese against her chest. The baby was quiet, watching. "You came alone," Cassian said. Not a question. "I did." "Foolish." "Necessary." Lucien's voice was steady. "I am here to negotiate." "And what do you have to offer me, Ashford? I have your son. I have your woman. I have everything that matters to you standing in my courtyard right now." "You do," Lucien agreed, "which is why I'm offering you everything I have." Cassian's expression shifted. "Explain." "The European clans, my seat on the ancient council, 5 centuries of territorial holdings, every alliance I've built, every favor I'm owed, every piece of power I've accumulated since the Renaissance." Lucien paused. "All of it, in exchange for Marin and Reese walking out of this fortress tonight, unharmed, unbound, free of any claim." No one moved. No one breathed. Cassian stared at him, searching for the angle, the trick. There wasn't one. "You would surrender the vampire world," Cassian said slowly, "for a mortal woman you have known 1 week." Without hesitation. "She will die, Lucien. In 60 years, 70 if she's lucky, you will have given up eternity for what amounts to a single breath." "Yes." "Why?" Lucien looked past Cassian, at Marin, at the woman standing in borrowed clothes holding his son. "Because some things matter more than forever," he said quietly. Cassian followed his gaze, looked at Marin, really looked at her, not as leverage, as a person. "You love her," he said, not a taunt, something quieter, as though the word had cost him something to say. "Yes." A long pause. "I loved my son," Cassian said. His voice changed on those words. "And your war took him from me." "I know," Lucien said. "You have never said that before." "I know that too." The courtyard went very still. 2 men, 500 years of enmity between them, and for the first time something that might have been understanding. Cassian opened his mouth to respond. "No." Marin's voice cut through the moment like a blade. Both men turned to her. "No," Cassian repeated. "No." Marin stepped forward. Reese made a small sound against her chest. "I speak for myself, and I say no. Miss Hollis, you don't get to negotiate my life without me," she said. To Lucien, to Cassian. "I'm done with that." Lucien took a step toward her. "Marin, please, let me do this." "Why, so you can give up 500 years and spend the rest of my very short life resenting me for it. So you can watch me age and die while you stay exactly the same, So you can add me to the list of losses you carry around. She shook her head. I won't be another thing you grieve, Lucian. I won't. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly. She turned to Cassian. And you? You think taking everything from him will make you feel better? Will fill the hole where your son used to be? It won't. Cassian's eyes narrowed. You presume to tell me what I feel. I presume nothing. I know. Marin's voice was steady now, strong. You lost your son in a war 100 years ago, and you've been carrying that grief every single day since. You turned it into this. She gestured at the fortress, at the cold stone, into walls so high nothing can reach you, into revenge, into a reason to keep going that doesn't require you to actually feel anything. You know nothing about me. I know everything about you. Marin held his gaze. I lost my daughter 6 months ago, Rosalie, 4 months old. She died in her sleep and there was no reason for it, just gone. And I spent 6 months trying to do exactly what you've done. Build walls, find something to blame, turn my grief into something I could control. Cassian was very still. It doesn't work, Marin said softly. The control, the revenge, building yourself into someone who can't be hurt again. I tried it, all of it, and all I had to show for it was an empty apartment and a nursery I couldn't walk into. She paused. Take your grief back, she continued. Stop trying to make Lucien carry it for you. It won't bring your son home, and it won't make the wound smaller. Nothing makes it smaller. You just learn slowly to carry it differently. Rhys reached up. His small hand found Marin's face, touched her cheek. And in that moment, standing in the gray dawn, Marin looked at Cassian Vale and saw herself 6 months ago, saw what she would have become if she hadn't gotten on that plane, if she hadn't stood up, if she hadn't reached for a stranger's crying child. Cassian looked at Rhys, really looked at him. Dark hair, pale skin, a child who had lost his mother before he ever knew her. He looked for a long time, and then he did something none of his guards had ever seen him do in 100 years of service. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, just long enough to let something pass through him that he had been holding at arm's length for a century. When he opened them again, something in his face was different, not softer, not kinder, but quieter, like a storm that had finally spent itself. Go, he said. Lucian didn't move. What? Go. Take your woman. Take your son. Get out of my fortress before I change my mind. Cassian, I am not doing this for you, Ashford. Cassian's voice was hard, final. I am doing it because that woman is right, and I am tired. I am so tired of being angry. He turned and walked back into his fortress without another word. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Lucian crossed the courtyard in 4 strides, took Marin's face in his hands, looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. What you just did, don't, Marin said. Don't make it into something bigger than it was. I just told the truth. You saved us. We saved each other. He kissed her then, in the gray dawn, in a courtyard that smelled of old stone and new possibilities. When they pulled apart, Rhys was making sounds between them, not crying, the happy babbling of a baby who could feel that the bad thing had passed. Let's go home, Marin said. They flew back to Romania that afternoon. Evelyn met them at the castle gates. She took one look at them all 3 together and nodded once. That night Lucien called the ancient council. The conversation was brief. He renounced his seat, transferred all holdings to his nephew Dorian, requested permanent freedom from interference under the ancient laws governing the blood milk bond. The council granted it. The bond was older than their authority. When it was done, Lucian found Marin in the nursery. She was rocking Rhys, humming something soft. It's finished, he said. How do you feel? Lighter. He crossed the room, sat beside her. Freer than I have felt in 500 years. Any regrets? None. He looked at Rhys, at Marin. Not a single one. "Where do we go now?" Maren asked. "Wherever you want." She thought about it, about London with its memories, about all the places she'd tried to run to when running was the only thing she knew how to do. "Scotland," she said finally. "Somewhere small, somewhere quiet, somewhere we can just be ordinary for a while." Lucienne smiled. "I don't think I've ever been ordinary." "Then it's time you learned." The cottage sat at the edge of a field that turned gold in autumn and green in spring. Windows faced east, caught the first light of every morning. There was a garden that had been abandoned long enough to become interesting. A kitchen with low wooden beams. Nothing like a castle. Exactly what they needed. The first morning Maren made tea while Lucian stood in the garden looking confused by soil. "I think things are growing," he called through the window. "That's generally what gardens do." He came inside with mud on his shoes and the expression of someone who had just discovered that after 500 years the world could still surprise him. They fell into rhythm. Mornings with Rhys, afternoons in the garden, evenings by the fire while the baby slept between them. Evelyn visited once a month, brought supplies, checked on them the way someone checks on family. Dorian came less frequently, but when he did, he brought news of the vampire world that Lucian listened to with decreasing interest. That life was behind him now. One morning in February, when Rhys was nearly a year old, Maren brought the leather box down from the shelf where it had sat untouched since they'd moved. Isolde's letters. She set it on the kitchen table. Lucian looked at it for a long moment. "I think I'm ready," he said quietly. "I think you made me ready." Maren poured 2 cups of tea and sat across from him while he opened the box and began to read. She didn't watch his face. Instead, she looked out the window at the frost on the garden, at the bare branches of the apple tree they'd planted in November. From the next room came the sound of Rhys talking to himself, walking now, every day more like a small person. After a long time, Lucian set the last letter down. His eyes were wet. "She knew," he said quietly. "In the letters, she knew she might not survive." He paused, steadied himself. "She wrote that she hoped if she didn't make it that Rhys would find someone who could love him the way she intended to." He looked up at Maren. She described her. Someone patient and brave, not afraid of what she doesn't understand. Someone who would choose him, not because she had to, because she wanted to. The kitchen was very still. "She wrote one more thing," he said, "at the very end." Maren waited. "Tell her thank you, whoever she is. Tell her thank you for loving what I had to leave behind." Neither moved to fill the quiet. Maren reached across the table. Her hand covered his. He turned his palm up and held on. Outside, something small and brown landed on the branch of the apple tree. Sat there for a moment, then flew away. They married on a Tuesday in spring. Small church, stone walls, morning light through the east window. Evelyn sat in the front row. Dorian drove 11 hours from Romania because someone had to represent the family properly. The vows were short. They had already said everything that mattered. This was just making it official. Afterward, in the garden behind the church, there were string lights and long tables and the smell of food and grass and the first edge of evening. Rhys was walking now, toddling between adults. At one point he fell down hard on his bottom and instead of crying just looked surprised and then delighted. "He looks like her," Lucienne said quietly. "Isolde, around the eyes." "I know," Maren said. "I've thought so too. It's good that he carries her." "Yes." Maren looked up at him. "Just as Rosalie is in me. They don't take up less space because we kept going. They travel with us." Lucienne brought her hand up and pressed his lips to her knuckles, held on. The string lights swayed. Rhys laughed. A sudden bright, entirely unexpected sound. His first real laugh. Full-bodied and joyful and completely without reservation. Evelyn looked so startled she nearly dropped her glass. Dorian had to turn away to hide his expression. The feeling spread through Maren like something unlocking. For the first time in years she thought grief and joy are in the same room and neither one is asking the other to leave. She leaned into Lucien's shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her. They watched their son laugh in the fading light and let it be enough. 2 months later, a package arrived at the cottage. No return address. Inside, a single white rose preserved in glass, and a note in careful script. Some wars end not with victory, but with understanding. Thank you for reminding me. No signature, none needed. Lucien held it for a long moment, then placed it on the mantel where morning light would catch it. Some enemies become something else when you stop fighting them. That night, after everyone had gone home and Rhys was asleep upstairs, Maren stood in the back garden under a sky full of stars. She was 10 weeks pregnant. She hadn't told Lucien yet. Was still turning it over, still making sure it was real. She would tell him tomorrow, over tea in the kitchen, in the ordinary morning light. Tonight she just stood under the stars and felt the full weight of everything that had led here. A flight from London, a baby who wouldn't stop crying, a single mother who stood up when everyone else stayed seated, not out of bravery, out of recognition, out of the simple knowledge that a child in pain needs someone to reach for him. A black card, a castle in the mountains, a man who had lived 500 years and was just learning what it meant to live instead of exist. A locked room, a courtyard at dawn, a choice that changed everything. Rosalie, who had loved rain. Rhys, who had learned to walk. A new child, not yet anything but possibility, already loved. Lucien came out to join her, put his arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She considered for a moment. "That I'm glad I stood up," she said. "On the plane, I'm glad I stood up." He pressed his lips to her hair. "So am I, every day. So am I." Above them, the stars burned quietly at an incomprehensible distance, the way they always have, the way they always will. And below them, in a small cottage in Scotland, in a life they had chosen instead of inherited, 2 people who had been broken by loss, learned what it meant to be whole again. Not by forgetting, not by replacing what was gone, but by making space for what remained, and for what was still to come. The most ordinary act of courage, standing up when everyone else stays seated, reaching for someone when something in you says yes, even though the mind asks why, can change the entire direction of a life. Not just yours, someone else's too. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that's enough. That has always been enough.